everybody, and welcome to Ministry Mondays with Meg. I'm Meg. All right, y'all. We're in season 4, episode 2. If this is your first time to join us on Ministry Mondays, 1, welcome. 2, where have you been? We've missed you. But we're actually so glad that you're here. Ministry Mondays is just where we talk about ministry, because ministry is all those things that we do, not just pastors, but that we have the opportunity to do no matter who we are, how we serve. Because what happens in the church Sunday, that's worship. Ministry is all those other things. I won't give you a sermon today, but I've got one if you need it. So today, my guest, I know every time I say that I'm so excited, but like seriously, I am excited, impressed, a little nervous, is Reverend Dr. Christopher Michael Jones, who's joining us from Hillside, New Jersey, right? Welcome to you. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you. I am so glad to be here and so appreciative of you inviting me to share this space with you. And I'm just really excited about this time that we'll share together to talk about all things ministry, faith, the church, maybe even hip hop. However the Holy Spirit leads us, I'm just glad to be a part of the conversation today.
So you can all read like this impressive bio that comes with the show, but I'm gonna let Dr. Jones tell you a little bit about who he is, how he serves. Like we'll get into, it's some pretty impressive history here. I was geeking out a little bit last night as I went over it again. But so Dr. Jones, would you like to tell everybody a little bit about who you are? And
Sure. Hello, everybody. So my name is Christopher Michael Jones. Currently serve as the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Hillside, a wonderful American Baptist congregation located in the township of Hillside, New Jersey, which is a residential township just outside of the city of Newark and tucked right behind the municipality of Elizabeth. Have been currently serving that congregation for 16 years. Husband to wonderful wife Nikki and the father of 3 amazing children. Jordan is just starting his first year of grad school at Dartmouth. He just graduated from the same college in May, an undergrad. Our middle baby Taylor is a junior at Fordham, and she dances for Alvin Ailey. And Amani is the baby, and she's a senior at the Petty School in Hightstown, New Jersey. And we're trying to figure out where her track legs will take her for college. Hillside, the church, is an amazing congregation. It's comprised of roughly 15 or 16 different ethnicities. We're a growing church. We're intergenerational. And while the marquee says that we are Baptist, the experience is very vibrant and a composition of a multitude of different worship expressions that kind of come together in a very unique way, which allows for some really amazing experiences and opportunities for us to engage in the work of transformation, not just corporately within the 4 walls of the church, but also outside the 4 walls of the church in the local community. In addition to that, I also currently serve as faculty mentor at United Theological Seminary, which is located in Dayton, Ohio. And so I have the privilege of providing leadership and mentorship to a group of doctoral students who are a part of the Hilliard Jones doctoral cohort. The name of that cohort is Builders and Bridgers, Transformational Approaches to Pastoral Leadership, Prophetic Preaching, and Spiritual Formation. And my co-faculty mentor, who helps to mentor these wonderful students, is the illustrious Bishop Donald Hilliard, who generously asked for me to join him in launching this new doctoral program at United. What a lot of people don't know, and Reverend Meg, you can jump in at any time, is that prior to me serving in the various capacities that I serve, I was, and you could say still am, a multi-platinum record producer. And so I've had the privilege of producing the likes of the Notorious B.I.G., Nas, Shaquille O'Neal, SWV, done remixes for R&B artists like Mary J. Blige, SWV, MOP, and so on and so on and so on. And my journey has been a very unique journey. And I talk about that journey in my new book release, A Sacred Storm. Forgive me for throwing the plug in. When God Speaks Through Radical Disruption. And I kind of wrestle with Mark chapter 6, verses 44 through 56, where Mark gives an account of this unexpected storm that changes the trajectory, the momentum of the disciples. And they ended up landing in a place where they never expected. And that's kind of been my ministerial journey in my adult life. Here I am, multi-platinum record producer, making as much as $30,000 a month producing and remixing some of the world's greatest recording and performing talent. And then I have a conversion experience in the studio, right when I'm in the midst of producing 5 songs for Janet Jackson. And I'm going to let you jump right on in. And before you know it, within a year's time, my journey then begins to prepare for pastoral ministry. So I know I've given a lot. So Reverend Meg, you can jump right on in. And
oh my gosh.
Was like,
yeah. So like, I'm going to say with my kid last night, with my youngest, who's 15, she's like, Mom, this dude's got a Wikipedia page.
Oh.
And do you see all these things on there? You know, Biggie, I know who that is, you know. So you're this is what I'm going. So you said conversion experience.
Sure.
Talk about like, how do you get
from there to here?
Yeah.
Sure. So when I was born and raised in New York City, graduated from Forest Hills High School. From there, I received an invitation to play basketball at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And in going into my sophomore year, after being redshirted my freshman year, I didn't pass a medical clearance because I had a slight heart murmur. And I had that heart murmur all of my life. But at that time, in the late 1980s, colleges began to get very nervous about collegiate athletes passing out on the court. And so for a time, any athlete that had any slight of issue medically, they would not clear them to compete. A lot of people don't know that. And so while I was trying to figure out, okay, what is my next step going to be, provided that I've been playing basketball my entire life, I ran into a friend at Howard's homecoming in 1990, Ricky Brathwaite, also known as Road Manager Rick. And he was managing Third Base at the time, a very famous hip hop group signed to Def Jam Recordings, I should say. And at the homecoming, he said, you know, Chris, what are you doing? Are you still playing? When can I come to your next game? And I shared with him that I wasn't playing at the time. And I was just so shocked at the fact that I couldn't compete on the court. I really wasn't prepared for life after basketball just yet. And so Rick understood and remembered that I always had a musical background. I was really gifted musically. And Rick suggested to me, why don't you consider first, try rapping, try being a performing artist in this new emerging industry called hip hop. And so I went home, I believe the summer of 1990, put together a group with an individual who was also a student at the time at UMBC. And the name of the group was Chris Large and Craig Live. Now, let me tell you what's very interesting about the group Chris Large and Craig Live. I was Chris Large, my friend Craig was Craig Live. When we put together our demo and we began to shop it to record companies all over the country, we got the same feedback over and over again. You guys as performing artists, not so good. But whoever is producing this music is amazing. And so I began to scratch my head and think to myself, well, maybe my future in the recording industry is not in rapping. Maybe my future is in producing. And so my friend, road manager Rick, shared with me a thought. You know what? Why don't you consider devoting your life to mastering some of this new digital equipment that's being manufactured for hip hop artists and record producers? And why don't you consider being a producer? I said, okay, I'll think about it. Lo and behold, an individual shows up at the front of my house in Jersey City. I was living there at the time with my father. And this individual dropped off almost $50,000 worth of recording equipment. And the understanding was that I would devote a year of my time to mastering this equipment, learning how to make hip hop and R&B records. And this individual, which was a part of a group of young men who were looking for an opportunity to invest the resources that they earned in the streets of New York City, made a proposal, if you know what I'm saying, made a proposal that they would pay for all of my incidentals as long as I commit myself to developing my craft as a producer. So I began to develop my craft. At the same time, they started traveling me to different destinations where there would be performing artist performances, where there were hip hop conferences. And this was all very new and exciting at the time. And what these individuals were doing was they were introducing me to the heads of record companies and getting me familiar with other producers and recording artists who had already created a niche for themselves in the industry. And I'd say within a year and a half to 2 years' time, I developed from being a pretty good producer to a very gifted record producer. And so the individuals who were handling me, who suggested that they be my manager full time, they bought a house for me in Los Angeles, planted me there with a group of other producers who were living in the vicinity, and we just devoted our lives to making records. And for those of you who don't know, for every record that you hear on the radio, that producer had to produce probably 100 records just to sell one. So record making, it's a very tedious, laborious process because the producer literally sits up from sunup to sundown, just creating different scales, different patterns, different songs, hoping that when he or she shops their music at the record company, out of that 100 songs that a CEO or that A&R rep hears, maybe they'll buy one. If you're really fortunate, they'll buy 2 or 3. And if you hit the jackpot, they may consider you to be the producer for an entire album. So I'm shopping my music. And while I'm shopping my music, my manager suggests to me that I meet an individual by the name of Rodney Jerkins. Some of you may know who Rodney Jerkins is, some of you may not. He is a Grammy award winning producer. He's produced everyone from Beyonce to Michael Jackson and so on and so on. So they fly me from Los Angeles to Pleasantville. Rodney and I meet. We start doing music together, and we create a song that eventually emerges on a movie soundtrack for Black Panther. The name of the song is Head Nod, but I'll go back to that in a moment. So while I'm with Rodney in Pleasantville, New Jersey, I get a call, and my managers say, "You need to stop everything. You have to meet Nas." Because Nas wants to do a record for a movie soundtrack, Street Fighter. The movie is getting ready to come out. He doesn't have a producer. So they bring me to Green Street Studios in downtown Manhattan. To make a long story short, Nas picks a record out of all the demos that I played for him, and behold, the producer, Chris Large, is born. My first record was with Nas, who at the time was arguably the most influential artist in hip hop. He had just released his album Illmatic, and my song was the segue between Illmatic and his second album. After Nas, all of a sudden, all of the record companies, they're calling me, Chris Large, we want you to produce this person. We want you to remix that person. And so for a series of 3 to 4 years, I get the opportunity to produce amazing talent. One of my most favorable moments in my journey as a producer was being called by Shaq and told that I needed to get on a plane right away so that myself and the Notorious B.I.G. could create this record with Shaq at his house entitled Still Can't Stop the Rain. You want to jump in? Am I talking too much? Or should
No,
I?
I'm just like, it's just like my brain is just,
So here we are. We're in Orlando. We're at Shaq's compound. And by the way, when the limos picked us up from the airport, they drive us to his estate, and a laser beam shoots out of the grill to open up this big black gate that had a Superman emblem in front of it. And so the gates open, and it's this sprawling estate with alligators on the bank. To my right, his studio is in front of us. His house is to the right of me also. Michael Jackson lives right across the water. Tiger Woods lives right down the block. Just an amazing experience. And we produce arguably the most important hip hop collaboration between a performing artist and an NBA icon. And there's a lot of history that sits behind that record. Shaq was in the middle of a nasty negotiation with the Orlando Magic. The Notorious B.I.G. just heard the song Hit 'Em Up that was performed, I should say, by Tupac. It had not hit the radio yet, but we heard a rough copy of it in Orlando, and we were shocked. We were aghast. And I had my own managerial issues that I was trying to work my way through. And so we came up with this concept, Still Can't Stop the Rain, to suggest to the listening audience that although there are all of these nefarious activities at work trying to hinder our progression as professional athletes, as performing artists, as a producer, nothing can stop us. We're going to thrust full speed ahead and embrace the fullness of all that we've been created to be. Not too soon after that, I produced an amazing remix with Pudgy and MOP. Many of you know the DJ, DJ D Nice during the pandemic. I produced him. And that record company said, Chris Large, we want you to produce 5 songs for Janet Jackson. Get your songs together, send them to Perspective Records, and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis will sift through your musical compositions and we'll see what fits. Just have your bag ready because you may have to go into the studio with Janet right away. Lo and behold, while I'm in the studio, it's 12:01, and I have a visitation experience. This being shows up with a burgundy robe with a gold sash. His face was like warm fire. His hair was like warm fire. Till this day, I cannot describe for you what color he was. My mind cannot, I don't have the capacity to describe what color he was. And I think that was by design, obviously. And my only question to him when he showed up in my studio that night was, am I going to die? And his response, Meg, was, not yet, but will you come and follow me? And then he disappeared. Now, for everyone who knows me, I've never done drugs. I've been an elite athlete my entire life. So I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't on drugs. This visitation really happened and it terrified me. So I called my father, who at the time was serving as a trustee at Mariners Temple Baptist Church. And the pastor of that church was the Reverend Dr. Susan Johnson Cook, who is a legendary leader in the ABC world. My dad says, son, what you're describing to me is on par with what we're reading about in the Bible. I don't have any answers for you, but what I suggest is that we set up a sit down with you and Dr. Cook, and let's hear what she has to say. Sure enough, I schedule my appointment with Dr. Susan Johnson Cook. I go into her office and I explain to her what happened. And she said to me, Meg, she said, Christopher, what you've experienced is something that rarely happens. My advice to you is that you stop everything and that you learn more about who that was that visited you and why the visitation happened. Now, my thinking was, if I didn't find out who that was who visited me, perhaps he would return and something terrible would happen. And I didn't want to face that potential reality. That experience was on par with kind of like when the angel appeared before Mary and made the announcement, behold, you're going to give birth to the Messiah by miraculous conception. That sense of awe. And for me at that time, it was fear. Obviously, that fear went away over time when I learned who visited me. But at that time, I was very fearful. And this really didn't resonate with me, the impact and the significance of this visitation experience, until I finished my undergraduate degree at Rutgers University. And I remember Dr. Malin said to me, he said, you want to know why the gospel that the apostles preached is true? And we all said, well, why? And he said, no one in their right mind would sign up for the death that they experienced as apostles. They saw something. They experienced something that was so compelling that they were willing to put their life on the line because of the message that they received from Jesus. When people ask me, why would you at the age of 20 walk away from being a multi-platinum record producer, making the amount of money that you made, having the kind of influence that you had, the access to all the material possessions, the fame and the fortune and the free, why would you walk away from that? Because I saw something. Jesus visited me in my studio that night and made a strong impression upon me that I had been set apart to engage in a work that I had not anticipated nor expected prior to that visitation experience that night. Dr. Cook said, go back to school, because I didn't finish my undergraduate education. So I went back to school, finished my undergrad degree at Rutgers University, earned my BA in philosophy from there, went to Princeton Theological Seminary, earned my MDiv there. From there, spent time at Oxford, before I started pursuing my doctoral degree first as a PhD student in rhetoric at the University of Memphis. And then I switched over to Memphis Theological Seminary, where I finished my DMin. With regards to the why,
Yeah.
so when Dr. Cook told me that I was called and that I needed to pivot immediately, she said, at some point, you're going to have to preach a trial sermon. Christopher, I discern that God has fast-tracked you. So when you read the Bible, read it very closely and see if you can find a theme that fits your journey and calling experience. And lo and behold, I stumbled upon this amazing text from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verses 44 to 56. Let me tell you why that passage really stood out for me. So here it is, Jesus had just fed 5,000 on this grassy knoll that sat just outside of the city of Capernaum. And I visited that place with some of our members from First Baptist Church of Hillside. And just to the right of that grassy knoll sits the Sea of Galilee. The gates of the village of Capernaum sits right behind the grassy knoll, and there's a mountain range right to our left. The text says after Jesus was finished feeding the 5,000, he told the disciples, okay, let's send the people back to the places from which they came. I want you guys to get into the boat, and I want you to sail across the Sea of Galilee to the village of Bethsaida. And then Mark says that Jesus goes up to that mountain range, and I can still see it with my own eyes because I was at that place in Israel.
I got to go too. So I'm there with you. I'm there with you.
And so Mark says that he's praying, but he's looking down towards the sea. And he notices that the disciples are struggling because a storm hits unexpectedly. Now, it's really peculiar that the disciples would be so afraid of this storm because some of them were fishermen. And I'm sure this isn't the first storm that they experienced on the Sea of Galilee. They would know that during the spring and summer months, the water gets really warm. And so the thermal heat that rises from the water collides with the wind that comes down from the mountain range onto the sea, which causes the great the circumstance for an unexpected storm. They've seen that storm before, and yet the text says that they're so afraid. They did not expect for this storm to show up in the way that it did. But it did show up, and it hit them with so much velocity that they had become disoriented. They forgot about their training, their skill, all of the teachings that Jesus had shared with them. They just saw Jesus feed 5,000. They forgot all about that in less than 12 hours, and they're losing their mind, lost in this storm. So what does Jesus do? He makes a decision. Rather than allow the disciples to remain stuck on the storm, Jesus decides to walk down that grassy knoll, and he walks on water, and he walks towards the disciples who are trapped in the boat. They're screaming. They don't know who Jesus is until he utters the words, "Be encouraged, it is I." Not only, Meg, does Jesus walk towards where the disciples were, who were struggling in this unexpected storm, Mark says Jesus then gets into the boat with the disciples. You see, this all becomes the framework of my ministry, which we'll talk about in a moment. And his presence and his words of comfort and encouragement settles the disciples down. And normally, after you share a word of encouragement with someone and you see that they've kind of calmed down, you walk away and you let them figure out on their own what the next steps will be in their respective life's journey. Mark says Jesus doesn't do that. Being the ultimate leader, the ultimate guide and shepherd of our souls that he is, Mark says that he stays in the boat with them. Now, here's something that we Bible readers miss. Remember, Jesus told the disciples, get into the boat, go to Bethsaida. This
Mhm.
storm rocks their world. And then Mark says, you know what? They never end up where Jesus told them to go initially. When they get to the other side of the sea, they land in the village of Gennesaret, which is many miles west of where Bethsaida was. So now we wrestle with deep theological questions. If Jesus is omnipotent, omniscient, if he's all knowing, did he know the storm was coming? And if he did, why did he ask the disciples to sail in one direction, knowing
Mm.
that they were going to encounter a storm? And on the other side of that storm, they would find themselves in an entirely different place and now functioning in an entirely different way. I contend, and I flesh this out in my book, A Sacred Storm, that the storms that we experience in life are unavoidable.
Mm.
The question for us is, how do we handle the storms when they come? And are we able to remember who is with us in
Mm.
the midst of the storms that we experience? And I'm sure some of you who are watching this conversation between Meg and I, you know what it's like to be in a storm. Some of you may be in a storm right now. It could be financial, it could be political, you could be in a spiritual storm,
Mhm.
it could be vocational, your health. You may be in a storm with your health, storm relationally, maybe
Mm.
a marriage imploded, or maybe your child is going through something, and that you find yourself having to provide support to a situation that you never saw coming. We all deal with storms, but as Christians, are we able to remember that God is with us in the midst of the storm? Or do we allow for our anxiety and our fear to overwhelm us to the degree that we forget that the great I am is with us and that he promises to be with us every step of the way? I'm going to create space for you to jump in, Meg. Let me just finish this last point and then I'm going to let you go.
Yeah.
Prior to this storm, the disciples had a very strong opinion about how Jesus should do ministry
Mhm.
and how he should engage with children and adults who crossed his path. The disciples would tell Jesus, "Ah, we think it's better that you engage the people this way. We think it's better that you engage the children that way. We think it's better that you strategize ministry." That the storm hits, Mark says, by the time they get to the other side, the disciples intentionally get out of the way.
Mm.
They allow the people in Gennesaret to see Jesus. And Mark says, as long as the people saw Jesus, they brought the sick, they brought the diseased, they brought the depressed and the despondent, and they were healed because of their encounter with the Lord. I contend we have to remember, as gifted as we are,
Mm.
as strongly opinionated as we may be, the best thing we can do as a Christian, and especially as a leader, is get out of the way. Not be fearful of where the storms take us. It is okay to land in a space that we never anticipated. Has the pandemic not taught us that? If we can remember to get out of the way so
Yeah.
that Jesus can be the star of the show, I contend that Jesus can heal people now in the same way he did in the Gospel of Mark.
Wow. And I mean, I don't know how anyone could think about that passage the same after hearing that. I'd always thought of it some as a protest, like I don't want to go to the other side. What's over there? I
Yeah,
need some assurances about what I'm going to encounter before I'm willing to submit, because I think that happens so many times.
yeah,
We want that sign from God. We want the whatever. We want that assurance that everything is gonna be okay. And come on, if you read the Bible at all, that isn't how Jesus rolls with it.
that's right.
Is come and follow me.
That's right.
That this ministry that we've been called to. Yeah, is it hard? Yeah, but it's
Yeah,
also the greatest job in the world.
it is.
And at the same time, it can be the greatest job in the world and the worst job in the world.
Yeah,
I've been a pastor too, so like, yeah, it can be. Um, but I love that sometimes the best thing we can do is just get out of the way.
get
I
out
mean,
of the way.
yeah, just
Can
get
I
out.
can I can I read a passage from my book? Just one sentence.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on page 33, it says, "Take courage to walk in the direction most would walk away from.
Mm,
Without courage, one cannot lead into the wind to uplift those who struggle in the middle of a storm." When I wrote that, I was thinking about the courage that it took for Jesus to walk counter into the storm when most of us would rather walk away from the storm. To your point about the difficulties of ministry, when I serve as pastor at my church, most of the people who walk through the doors seeking salvation, they are in the middle of a storm.
mm,
And as leaders, as servant leaders, we have to be intentional about developing a moral courage that will allow for us to walk towards the storms that the people are experiencing and speak to the wind
mm.
the same way that Jesus did. You know, John gives a different version of the same story. And I love the way he says that Jesus spoke into the wind. He says, be still. And when you read that in the Greek, he literally says, shh, be quiet. He doesn't raise his voice, just shh, be quiet. How much more healing would the members of our church experience if we were able to speak more with a still, quiet voice rather than with a voice that's on par with a raging wind? How much more would we be able to get our political leanings across if we spoke more like Jesus, using his tenor and tone, rather than using the kind of rage that only discourages
Yeah,
and never allows for the type of empathetic listening that we all need and crave?
yeah. And folks, I'll be sure to put a link to this book because I need to read it, and I think this is definitely something that everyone probably needs to read
Thank
now.
you.
I mean, and I mean, it just really speaks to my heart about what's going on in our country.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, we can say across the world, but like just flip on the radio,
yeah,
read a news page, and yeah, you'd have to be pretty unplugged from everything not to have a clue about what's going on. But um, so like you talk about a communication methodology,
yeah, sure.
where you're reaching
Sure.
Multiple generations. So is this, I mean, like, is this it?
So
Is
I
this
can
what you experience?
so I can speak to how I live out Mark 6 in my professional ministry. Um, so as I said before, I believe that when people walk into the doors of the church, they walk in with storms, and we're called to speak to those raging winds to calm those storms down so that people can hear and see God differently. But before they come, I believe that there's something that we have to do to meet them where they are,
Mm.
right? Because if Jesus is the perfect model of leadership that we're supposed to be following, I believe if you're going to be a disciple of Jesus, well, you got to actually do the things that Jesus did. And so when I first got to First Baptist Church of Hillside, I was very intentional about launching new outreach initiatives,
Mm.
which allowed for us to meet people out in the community rather than insisting that the people come into the four walls of the church. Because I've always been under the belief that the larger portion of the ministry and the church that we're supposed to pastor may never come into the four walls of the church.
Right.
So you have to be bold enough, courageous enough to meet them in the market square the way that Jesus did and speak to them on their terms and in their own setting and allow for that incarnational presence of Christ to experience through your loving conversations that you have with them. And so we did really creative things from day one. So, for instance, we decided that we wanted to provide comfort and care to a community of battered single mothers. So we contacted this facility where these battered single mothers were being housed, and we got their permission to rent out a Marriott, and we put them in hotel rooms over a weekend, and we brought vendors in to service the mothers and to give them a new hairstyle, new clothing, manicure, pedicure, and other resources that they could use to maintain their upkeep. We also provided social services
Mm.
for these women because they're very transient. They're in between, where they came from and where they're hoping to go. Uh, we brought in experts who could kind of facilitate their transition into transitional housing and other setting outside of the region where they were assaulted. We contracted limos to pick them up from that shelter, and they were treated with 5-star love, care, and class. For me, that's an example of what it looks like to meet a community that is in the middle of a storm, get into the boat with them, calm down the winds that are raging in their lives, provide them care and comfort so that they can begin to see and hear God's activity differently, and then be able to discern what life can look like on the other side of their Sea of Galilee.
Mhm.
We immediately started targeting the youth in our community, especially the underserved youth who don't have resources for school, who don't have access to Wi-Fi, et cetera, et cetera. So we began to provide resources for the children and the youth in the community. We partnered with Walmart to provide free eyeglass prescription, to provide uh, blood pressure monitoring and in prescriptions and just all different sorts of outreach initiatives. And so before you know it, we were averaging somewhere between 15 and 30 people joining the church a Sunday. All of our growth, 80%, 85% of our new growth has come from outreach.
Mm.
So even though the church is 105 years old, since I've been there, it feels like a transplant
Mm.
because we've put all of our thrust and focus on outreach. because I really do believe in Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20. Some read it. I really believe it. I really believe the church is called to go and to teach and to decide. I really believe in that. And we try to live that daily. And Matthew 28, verses 19 through 20 informs the way that we budget annually and the way that we allocate resources towards the initiatives that we want to support to connect with members in the community that normally would not have access to a traditional church. I'm also the head chaplain of Hillsides Police Department and the fire department, because guess what? Policemen and firemen need Jesus too. And so I do ride-alongs with our beloved officers, and I encourage them. I pray with them. If there's a need for a wedding to be presided over, or even counsel when someone is considering a divorce or battling with depression, I always avail myself to that community of law enforcement, because they need to experience the love of God too. And that experience needs to be felt non-judgmentally, especially considering the climate that we're in now. I was intentional about getting to know the mayor, getting to know our city council persons, and partnering with them in launching initiatives that would provide social services to the entirety of the local community. We're the number one food distributor in Union County. So we use various vendors like the Community Food Bank of New Jersey to provide resources to those who are in between jobs, those who are underemployed, those who are not illegally present here in the country. And that service there's no end to the needs that need to be met. And so again, for me, following the gospel as it's presented in Mark chapter 6, for me, it's all about getting into the boat and meeting people where they are and not leaving them until they find safe footing on the other side of their storm. I believe in that model for ministry. I practice it day in and day out. Our young people love it, especially our millennials. I think that Generation Remix, which is our millennial ministry at the church, I think it's one of the best in the country. And it's because we're just really intentional about being engaged in authentic relationship building, rather than being dogmatic and just telling people this is the way it is, this is how you have to be, and if you don't like it, there's just something wrong with you. No, that's not how Jesus actually corresponded with those whom he was trying to reach, and I don't think we should do that either.
I have the great appreciation that you said more than once, that you get into the boat with people.
Yeah.
I think so often there's that mentality that we're all in the same boat. And that isn't true.
It isn't true.
Some of us have yachts while others have dinghies, and maybe your boat is rented, and maybe your boat looks more like a makeshift raft that's just been tied together and is falling apart. And maybe you're one of those people who's terrified of the water.
That's great.
And don't even want to get in. So
I love that, because I love what you just said, because depending upon the type of boat that a person is in will determine your approach.
Yeah. And maybe the best thing that we can do is stand with that person who's too afraid to get into the boat. Just stand until they're ready.
Until they're ready.
Sure, encourage them, but don't just, hey, we're gonna sink or swim kind of thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
So I so appreciate that. And I mean, like, this is the picture, this is the model of the church. This is what it's supposed to be, and
It's supposed to be.
I love that. So, like, given the political climate, are you having people that come in and are like, this boat is really scary, and I don't know what to do. Maybe my boat's leak. You feel like your boat's sprung a leak. Kind of thing. And Pastor, yeah, I understand that God may be coming back, but I'm still waiting.
Of course.
Like, what are you saying to
So my doctoral degree wrestles with what it looks like to preach pastoral care in the African American tradition, because we were growing so fast that I didn't have the resources or the skill set in house to manage or facilitate all the pastoral care that needed to be rendered to this growing church. And so one of my mentors suggested, why don't you preach pastoral care until you're able to hire those who specialize in providing those kinds of services to your people, or until you're able to disciple your own so that they're able to provide pastoral care to each other. And so in times like these, I focus on themes like hope, joy, perseverance, but also justice and righteousness too. And so in my context, I'm not afraid to speak truth to power with love. I think that we can't be afraid to tell the truth. In fact, I was reading a passage from my book earlier today, and I want to read it again. Sounding the alarm and raising our collective consciousness, Dr. Marvin A. McMickle argues in Where Have All the Prophets Gone? Reclaiming Prophetic Preaching in America. In the face of all that is currently happening in our world, it is shocking to know that the voice of the prophet is too rarely heard. To the detriment of the moral authority of many pulpits in America, the prophetic voice has become mute at a time when the church should be leading the charge in calling for lamentation, repentance, reparations, and robust initiatives to uplift the least fortunate. These are my words. We need to lead into the wind with radical efforts that build up economic empowerment, improve our mental health, increase adequate housing, provide a livable wage, better educate our young people, and take a more holistic approach in reteaching America how to engage in compassionate acts of kindness, especially toward the most vulnerable in our local communities. We need more prophets and more truth tellers, more hope dealers, and sage thinkers. That phrase there, compassionate acts of kindness, compassionate acts of kindness. I'm really locked into having discussions about what it looks like to engage in compassionate acts of kindness. In my context, we have to engage in compassionate acts of kindness because we may not receive those acts of kindness from anyone or anywhere else. And so I tell my leaders all the time, if people can't find peace, love, joy, affirmation anywhere else, they have to be able to find it in the house of the Lord. And so all of my energy is directed towards uplifting the people that I'm responsible for, but at the same time, educating them, tapping into professionals in the local community, and even those who make an impact nationally to come to our congregation, whether it be in person or virtually, and to share facts. to share facts. And then I kind of lead discussions with regard to, now, how do we manage these facts, and how would God um, have us live out our faith in the midst of the facts that we're contending with at this time. And no matter what we do, may we be compassionate. May we be compassionate, because I believe the beloved community that Dr. King spoke so nobly and honestly of, is rooted in acts of compassion. And if without that, we're not really Christian.
Mm. That's beautiful. Yeah. Oh, I agree. I couldn't. I'm sitting here nodding my head, because like this is where my heart lies,
Yeah,
and my hope for the church
yeah,
is that more of them figure out that, know that call to go for the, the Matthew 20, that wasn't just a suggestion.
it wasn't just a suggestion.
Right, that is a call to all of us, whether you have a title or not.
Right.
Whether, yeah.
And can I say something? And
Mhm.
I wrestled with this in my book also, because I put the church in conversation with the hip hop community. What a lot of people don't know is that the reason why hip hop emerged first in New York City in the 1970s, early 1980s, it emerged as a prophetic response to the policies that were being handed down from the likes of Ronald Reagan, along with local politicians in New York City, that were canceling out all of the social services and the programs that youth once had access to just one generation before. So here it is. You have all of these young people in this city, and they have nowhere to go to express their artistic ability. They have nowhere to go to speak their voice. I hate to see it, but a lot of our churches did not make room for these underserved youth. I know preachers hate when I say it, but it's the truth. And so, what these young urban prophets, I call them prophets, started doing is they started gathering in parks and in house parties, and they
Mm.
began to speak the word coupled with the beat from the turntable. And hip hop songs began to be formulated. Songs like The Message. The Message spoke to the social ills that young people were experiencing at the time, and these young people were not being listened to. And so they put prophetic hope to music to
Mhm.
announce to the world there are really bad things happening in our local communities, and we need to do something about it. When NWA released their seminal record, F the Police, they released that record in response to the harsh treatment that they were experiencing at the hands of the police force in Los Angeles. And while people were pulling their hair out saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe they're saying these words," well, truth be told, they were getting their brains beaten out.
Yeah.
And no one was advocating on their behalf except for Maxine Waters. But no one, and the church wasn't present or actively engaging in conversation with these young people. So again, hip hop provided a platform for young people who weren't in the church to speak boldly and courageously to the injustice that was happening in their local communities. And I say all that to say that the church cannot overlook the youth that are in their midst. And we shouldn't have to wait for a young person to become an adult before they're given the right to speak their mind.
Yeah.
Hip hop has done a great job in providing young people an opportunity to speak truth to power. And I believe if you study civil rights movements, any prophetic movement, more oftentimes than not, it was led by young people. And so we need to be more intentional about creating healing spaces for young people to come into our churches and speak truth to power. Yes, we want them to frame their message holistically, preferably with the gospel, but the truth is the truth. Whether it's spoken within the framework of scripture or outside of it, the truth is the truth. And I always tell my ministers, wherever the truth is being spoken, no matter who speaks it, that is always where you will find Jesus working.
Yes, all of that. Wow. Folks, if you are in need of a place to worship, First Baptist Church of Hillside, New Jersey, I am sure that you would be more than welcome.
We'd love to have you.
Welcome there. I want to make sure I ask you that joy question.
Yeah.
So, what is in all that you do? What is the thing that brings you joy?
So 3 things.
Yeah.
The New York Knicks.
Oh, great.
We're having the best season of our lives. Thank
No
you.
one was ever answered that way. Okay.
The New York Knicks bring me joy.
Okay.
That's number 1. Number 2, obviously my family.
Yeah.
They bring me tremendous joy. Number 3, music. Being in the studio. I just started recording the Audible version of this book. Thank you, Pilgrim Press, for adding new and innovative components to this new release that came out a few weeks ago. For just meeting people where they are without any pretense. My people at FBC, we call First Baptist Church of Hillside the Hill, the place we affectionately call the Hill. I get to dress any way that I want. So the way I'm dressed now, I'll preach this way. I'm a hybrid of both hip hop and the church. And so my people don't know what I'm going to show up in from Sunday to Sunday. I love that freedom of expression that our members allow for me to kind of lean into. It allows for creativity in a way that I really appreciate. I love my people at the Hill. There's some good folk. And obviously, Jesus, because I promise you, I had no interest in being in ministry whatsoever. And there isn't a month that doesn't go by when I have my one-on-one with the Lord and ask, why? But he reminds me that even though I sacrificed a lot materially, I have so much more spiritually. I may have been wealthy when I was younger, but now that I'm older, I'm so much richer. And I thank him for that.
Yeah. I do want to ask one other thing is you mentioned your dad was the trustee.
Yes.
So you grew up in the church? So
when my father, not really introduced, I'll say he introduced me to Dr. Susan Cook. And she left Mariners Temple to start Bronx Christian Fellowship.
Okay.
And it was at Bronx Christian Fellowship where she began to train me as a youth minister. I'm her first son in ministry. For those of you who are ABC, you know who Dr. Susan Cook is.
I do.
And I was her first baby boy in ministry. From there, when I prepared to go to Princeton for seminary, that's when I went on staff at the cathedral with Bishop Donald Hilliard and Dr. Bernadette Glover and so many other great mentors. When I started the PhD in Memphis, Dr. Frank Thomas took me under his tutelage, Dr. Martha Simmons, so many great mentors, so many different people poured into my life. I'm kind of a composite of the investments of so many different people. But my journey started at Bronx Christian Fellowship, I should say, under the tutelage of Dr. Susan Johnson Cook.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Yes, and as you say, if you're an American Baptist, you know exactly who Dr. Susan Cook is.
That is correct.
Yes, um, and we are grateful that that she heard, and nurtured and didn't say, are you sure about that? That she said, stop what you're doing and do this thing.
Well, I would say she would rather that I not give up making $30,000 a month because of the tithes and offerings. I don't know if she wanted me to give up that much, but no.
Right.
All jokes aside,
Yeah.
to her credit, she did tell me to stop everything and prepare. If you're going to take your calling seriously, you have to prepare. Don't just run out there half cock, unprepared, misleading and misguiding people. Prepare first. And after you have been fully prepared, then go.
Mm.
And so, what I loved about serving under Dr. Cook is that she always brought in the best preachers. In fact, I'm at United Theological Seminary because of my interactions with giants like Samuel DeWitt Proctor, who founded the doctoral program at United Theological Seminary. And he
Yeah.
would say to me, Jones, you're going to be at United one day. And I never thought that I'd end up being at United as a faculty mentor, not as a student, but he spoke those prophetic words over my life. The great John Bryant, the great bishop of the AME Church, just so many great preachers that she brought to Bronx Christian Fellowship and Mariners Temple Baptist Church. And that, I think, my exposure to those great leaders, it accelerated my growth
Mm.
because I got to see great models of leadership from day one. And I aspired to be like them because I thought, well, if I'm a multi-platinum record producer and I'm doing great things without Jesus, well, I should do the same now that he's in my life. And
Mm.
so I'm always looking for models of leadership that will inspire me. And I love ABC in particular because ABC allowed for Dr. Cook to lead and express herself in ways that other historic Baptist conventions would not. And so all of my spiritual life has been with ABC, and I enjoy the freedom that my ABC family gives me as well.
And I am so grateful that for the prophetic, those prophetic voices. Um, and I think that's something that the Black church does so well.
Sure.
And that was one thing in seminary with me
Mm,
was with a couple of my professors who were like, who would call you reverend, and then they explain, and you go, but I'm not reverend.
yeah,
Oh, but you will be.
but
And
you
you're
will.
like, I don't know that. And
Right.
oh, but I do. And
That's right.
and and then and then they explain, and
That's right.
here's in our church tradition how this works. We we see this in you, and we are affirming this in you, and so we are calling you
That's right.
um to this calling that God has called you. And so I you know it, the more prophetic voices that we can get, that we can raise up, the better. The
I agree
better.
with you. We just lived that out this past Sunday. Now the Reverend Cassandra Foster, we just ordained her Sunday evening, and I reminded her, with Bishop Hilliard being present and Bernadette Glover as well, that she is a part of a very distinct spiritual lineage, and that she should take that lineage, that prophetic lineage, very seriously. So Dr. Proctor trained and laid hands on Bishop Hilliard. Dr. Bernadette Glover, they played a role in training me, laid hands on me, and now I've conferred that same legacy upon Cassandra, and she is to do the same from generation to generation to generation. So, to your point, that prophetic witness can be the difference between someone fulfilling their calling and someone perhaps not doing so simply because they didn't have the right voices speaking into the wind.
Absolutely. 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 I agree. So folks, if you're watching, if you're listening, one, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Jones, for your
Thank you for having me.
and I wish I could like as you were telling your story, I'm over here with the Holy Spirit and just the chills coming over me just as you told your story. So I look forward to getting and reading the book myself.
Thank you.
We will share all the links with everybody listening or watching so that you too can get this book and read it. And I think it's something that especially now that's made for a time such as this.
Thank you to glory. Thank you.
Yeah. And yeah, and I'm just honestly so grateful to you for your ministry, for giving your time to do this, to tell your story. And
Anytime.
it's amazing. Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we thank everybody for watching, for listening. And if you also have a story to share, get in touch, and love to give you a place to tell your story too. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Amen.